I still hear that sound sometimes, the scrape of chair legs against marble, that dry, slicing noise that cut through the laughter and silverware. It's been 6 months, but every time I close my eyes, it plays again, followed by his voice, calm, performative, and just loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. This spot's for the CEO. Move. We were at the Meridian, the kind of restaurant that makes you whisper without realizing. Polished glass walls, white linen folded into knife edges, truffle butter glistening under gold lamps. It was the quarterly board dinner, the first one I'd been invited to in my 5 years with the company. Operations lead, mid-level, steady record. I'd spent all week pretending it was no big deal. I even brought a new tie, dark navy with a single silver stripe, just enough to look prepared, but not eager. The seating chart had been emailed that morning. I was supposed to sit between Helen from finance and our VP of logistics. Perfect visibility, my manager Ray had said with that toothpaste smile of his. Big night for you. I showed up early, rookie move, and waited by the table while servers adjusted name cards and placed wine glasses like surgical tools. I spotted my card easily. Michael Lane, ops lead. Right there, center row, one seat down from Ray himself. He came in 5 minutes later, shaking off his coat, already talking too loud. Ray had a voice that needed walls to bounce off. Evening, champ, he said, clapping me on the shoulder like he owned it. You nervous? Not really, I lied. He grinned, that kind of grin that flashes teeth but hides thought. Then he glanced at the chair beside mine, the one marked Reserved, CEO, and his eyes lit up like he'd found a stage. The executives started to arrive. Shoes on marble, perfume, a hum of small talk. The CEO, still on a call, hadn't shown yet. That's when it happened. Ray stood behind me, looked at my chair, and said loud enough for half the table to turn, Mike, that spot's for the CEO. Move! I froze. I looked down. My name tag was right there, taped to the tablecloth. He reached past me, pulled the chair back, hard, the legs screeching across the floor. A few heads turned. Someone laughed softly, a dry, nervous sound. This whole side's for execs, Ray added, already sliding into my seat. You'll sit over there. He pointed toward the far end of the table, near the catering staff's service door. I opened my mouth, closed it again. The moment stretched, just long enough for everyone to know I'd been humiliated, and to pretend they hadn't seen it. Helen from finance looked at her glass. The VP adjusted his tie. I could see my reflection in the window, a man half standing, half smiling, not sure what expression fit. So I moved, quietly. I took the empty chair near the waiter's station, close enough to smell the hot plates coming from the kitchen. From where I sat, I could see Ray laughing, leaning into conversations, his cufflinks flashing under the chandelier. He hadn't left me just without a seat. He'd erased me from the table. Dinner went on. Lobster risotto, toast to quarterly performance. The CEO arrived, glanced around, and sat 2 seats away from where my name tag used to be. He didn't notice, or maybe he did. Either way, Ray filled every silence. Every story was his. Every question he intercepted. When the desserts came, a few people finally acknowledged me with polite smiles. Didn't realize you were here, one of the board assistants said, then caught herself and added, Glad you could join? I nodded, swallowed another mouthful of humiliation, and told myself not to forget the sound of that chair. After the dinner, as we walked out, Ray slapped my back again. Don't take it personally, he said. Optics, that's all. You'll get your turn. I didn't answer. I watched the valet bring his car around, a dark Tesla with the company plate frame, and thought about how easily he took things that weren't his. Credit, space, air. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the scrape, the laugh, the way the others looked away. I wasn't angry, not exactly. More focused. Because if he thought that was the end of the story, he'd forgotten who handled all the operational reports, including expense codes, seating plans, and vendor logs, and some of those didn't add up, not even close. The next morning, the office felt quieter. Not peaceful quiet, but that kind of airless calm that follows a public embarrassment everyone pretends not to remember. You can always tell when you've been talked about before you walk in. The pauses in mid-conversation, the low glances, the sudden fascination with coffee cups. Ray's door was open, always open. That was his brand. Transparency, he called it. The kind of transparency that lets everyone see you sitting across from him getting dressed down for nothing. I passed by, nodded once. He didn't even look up. By noon, an email went out to our entire department. Subject line, Team Visibility and Optics. The body was classic Ray. Paragraphs of self-congratulation disguised as mentorship. As we represent operations at the executive level, let's be mindful of seating and optics in mixed company events. Titles matter. They reflect structure, not ego. We all serve the same mission. I read it 3 times. I was the optics lesson. 2 days later, my expense report for the client site visit, a legitimate one, came back rejected. Incorrect cost code, finance wrote. When I checked the system, the line item had been reassigned from 804, field operations, to 802, client care executive hospitality. That was odd. 802 was Ray's playground, the bucket that covered his endless team dinners, Uber black rides, client brunches with people who didn't exist. At first, I told myself not to see ghosts, but the pattern was too clean. Same vendors, same inflated receipts, same group charges with missing attendee lists. I started saving copies. Quietly. Screenshots, PDFs, timestamps. I'd learned long ago that revenge in a corporate world isn't loud. It's organized. I built a folder, labeled it Training Materials. Inside, 37 line items that didn't make sense, all routed through Ray's approval. I didn't tell anyone at first, not even Helen from finance, though I caught her giving me that sympathetic look people give when they know you've been publicly embarrassed. She stopped by my desk one afternoon with a coffee and a half smile. "Rough night at the Meridian, huh?" she murmured. I didn't react. She waited a beat, then added, "Just so you know, there's no such thing as reserved CEO seating. We pre-approve layouts." Then she walked off. That was the first thread. The second came from the facilities coordinator, Alan, a quiet guy who handled office layouts, conference setups, and the seating plans for corporate events. I caught him in the break room, mid-yawn. "Hey, Alan," I said. "Quick question. That board dinner, did you handle the chart?" "Yeah," he said. "Why?" "Was the CEO's seat marked?" He frowned. "No, we don't pre-reserve those. CEO sits wherever the chair of the board tells him. Why?" I smiled, shrugged. Just curious. That night I opened my folder again, added Alan's name to it. Over the next 2 weeks, the retaliation came subtle. My calendar invites started disappearing. No more leadership syncs. My reports accidentally got rerouted. Ray even called me into his office one afternoon, folded his hands, and said, "Mike, you've been a bit off lately. Is everything okay?" "I'm fine," I said. He sighed, all paternal concern. "I want to see you win, man. But you've got to remember, perception is reality. Don't make yourself look defensive. That's corporate for keep your mouth shut." After I left, I got a call from someone unexpected. Julia, the CEO's chief of staff. "Hey, Michael," she said, voice brisk, clipped, efficient. "Can you stop by my office tomorrow? 10 minutes tops." When I walked in the next morning, she had my expense log open on her screen. Not mine exactly, Ray's. She didn't waste time. "You noticed it too, didn't you?" I stayed silent. "Good," she said. "We've been tracking some inconsistencies, but your documentation, it's clean." "I wasn't trying to—" She waved a hand. "You don't have to explain. Just know it's being escalated quietly. You didn't see this file. You don't know me. Understood?" I nodded. She leaned back. "And, Michael, that chair incident? Don't lose sleep over it. It was loud, but it was useful. It showed exactly what kind of person we're dealing with. For the first time in weeks, I felt my pulse steady. Someone else had seen it. 3 days later, an email landed in my inbox, CC'd to Ray, HR, and legal. Subject, Q1 audit, vendor expense alignment review. On the surface, it was routine, but I recognized the phrasing, Julia's phrasing. It was a tripwire disguised as a memo. Ray called me into his office again that afternoon. You know anything about this audit? I looked him straight in the eye. No idea. He stared at me for a long second, searching for something. Guilt, fear, maybe even respect. Then he smirked. All right, champ, keep your nose clean. Don't let anyone drag you into their witch hunts. I smiled back, calm, almost friendly. Wouldn't dream of it. That night, I added a new folder to my drive. Q1 review, supporting docs. Because the next board meeting was in 6 weeks. And this time, I knew exactly where I'd be sitting. The closer we got to the audit, the more the office began to buzz with that specific kind of fear that doesn't show up in emails but lives in the tone of them. Sentences got shorter. People avoided each other in hallways. Finance suddenly stopped approving miscellaneous reimbursements. Ray, for once, started coming in early. Too early for someone who usually walked in with a latte and a podcast playing through his AirPods. He was sweating under his perfect calm, and everyone could feel it. I kept my head down, smiled in meetings, worked late, quietly, but behind the scenes I was feeding compliance and Julia exactly what they needed. Timestamped screenshots, vendor lists, and the full PDF history of every Client Care 802 expense code since the fiscal year began. The numbers told a story, a loud one. Ray had billed over $27,000 under client entertainment that no one could trace to an actual client. The names on his attendee list read like ghosts. Anderson, B, Choi, L, R, Patel. None of them existed in our CRM. And that dinner at the Meridian, he'd charged it under Team Morale, tagging the CEO as present. It was the kind of arrogance that only comes from thinking no one's watching. Meanwhile, Ray was unraveling, but carefully, politely. The man was a professional gaslighter. He started CCing me on meaningless updates, subtly implying I was his deputy again. Then came the not-so-subtle move. A draft performance improvement plan addressed to me, marked for internal review. I found it at 2:14 a.m., buried in a shared folder I shouldn't have had access to. It accused me of inconsistent collaboration and resistance to leadership optics, the same language he'd used in that email after the dinner. He was laying groundwork, just like I was. I didn't panic. I saved the file, documented access times, and sent the metadata to Julia's private inbox. Her reply came 5 minutes later. Perfect. Do not confront him. Sit tight. 2 days later, the official audit pre-brief went out. HR called it a routine expense alignment exercise. Everyone else called it what it was, an execution. In the week before the board meeting, compliance quietly requested the seating chart from facilities. Alan called me at 9 p.m. Hey, Mike, he whispered. They just asked for the layout from that dinner. Who's they? Internal audit and legal. Julia was CC'd. My heart rate kicked up. And? They know the CEO's seat wasn't reserved. It was in motion. The day before the board meeting, Julia stopped by my cubicle. A first. She was holding a folder and a small coffee. Tomorrow's going to be loud, she said quietly. Just stay where you are. Don't volunteer anything. If asked, answer honestly, nothing more. I nodded. She handed me the coffee. For what it's worth, she added, you're the only reason we caught this before Q2. When the next morning came, the atmosphere inside the boardroom was electric. People laughed too loudly, adjusted their watches too often, smiled too long. I was seated this time, dead center, 1 seat from the CEO. The same place where I'd been told to move. My name card looked freshly printed. Ray walked in 5 minutes late. still trying to project his usual swagger, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. His suit was immaculate. His eyes, not so much. "Morning, team," he said with false brightness. "Let's have a good one." The audit presentation began like any other. Slides, numbers, polite nods. Then Julia took over. "Before we move on," she said evenly, "we've identified several irregularities in the Client Care 802 account. I'd like to walk the board through a few examples." The first slide came up. It was the invoice from the Meridian. The one for the dinner. My dinner. The one where Ray took my chair. There was the charge, executive dining event, CEO present, signed by Ray. The CEO's eyebrows lifted. "I wasn't at this dinner," he said, almost amused. Julia nodded. "That's correct. In fact, the seating plan provided by facilities confirms that your seat was never assigned, but one of our mid-level leads was told otherwise." Ray shifted in his chair. "That must be a misunderstanding." She clicked to the next slide. Expense report cross-referenced with timestamps. The PIP draft metadata. The falsified names. "Ray," Julia said softly, "could you explain why these entries list phantom attendees and fabricated client meetings?" The room went silent. You could hear the projector fan humming. Ray laughed, a small strangled sound. "Look, sometimes we put placeholder names in for privacy. Everyone does it." The CEO leaned forward. "Do you also fabricate my attendance for privacy?" That's when the mask cracked. Ray's voice faltered. He tried to pivot, to spin, to talk about company culture, but every word made it worse. Compliance slid a folder across the table. Receipts, emails, even the timestamp document from his draft PIP. And for the first time, Ray had nothing to say. When Julia thanked me at the end of the session, not directly, just a quiet, "Good work on your reporting consistency," I didn't move. I didn't even look at him. The board adjourned for a private review. Ray was asked to stay. I was asked to step outside. As I left the room, I caught his reflection in the glass wall. Pale, blinking, jaw tight. The same man who once said move, now frozen in a seat he couldn't leave. They kept him in there for nearly 2 hours. I waited outside, standing by the window in the corridor that overlooked the downtown skyline. The conference room blinds were half closed, but I could still see the shadows moving. Silhouettes pacing, sitting, rising again. Occasionally, a muffled voice rose above the low hum of air conditioning, then silence. Long, heavy silence. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Ray who came out first, it was Julia. Calm, collected, with her folder pressed flat against her chest like a shield. Behind her, the CEO followed, his face unreadable, a look carved from granite. Ray trailed them. His tie was gone, jacket over one arm, face drained of its usual color. He looked smaller, not physically, but in presence, like someone had pulled the air out of him, the kind of small you can't fix with posture or tone. "Ray," the CEO said quietly, "you'll be escorted by security to gather your personal effects. Legal will follow up on the formalities." That was it. No speech, no second chance. He didn't argue, didn't even nod, just whispered, "Understood," and walked past me without a glance. I caught the faint scent of his cologne, citrus and something sharp, and realized I'd smelled it at every meeting, every mentoring session, every room where he'd held the upper hand. Now it lingered behind him like the ghost of his own arrogance. 2 security officers followed. One of them carried a small cardboard box. It took 5 minutes for the news to ripple through the floor. 5. That's all it ever takes. One text, one Slack message, and suddenly everyone's getting coffee just to pass his office door. By noon, his nameplate was gone. The blinds were drawn, and the company calendar no longer had his standing 8:30 a.m. Leadership touch point. That afternoon, an internal memo went out from HR. Subject, cultural alignment and seating protocols. Effective immediately, all company events, meetings, and functions will operate under an open seating model. Titles do not determine placement. Respect and merit determine voice. I read it twice, then once more, slowly. Seating protocols. They'd actually put it in writing. Julia stopped by my desk later that day. She didn't smile. She wasn't the smiling type, but her voice was softer than usual. "He's gone," she said simply. "For cause. Expense falsification, procedural misconduct, workplace harassment. The board signed off unanimously." I nodded. "Thank you." She studied me for a second. "You handled this well, Michael. You stayed measured. That's rare." "I just wanted it to stop," I said. "That's exactly why it worked," she replied, and left. A week later, I was transferred directly under the COO. A quiet promotion, no announcements, just a calendar update and a new badge access level. No confetti, no speech, just space. The first executive dinner after the audit was smaller. No fanfare, no theatrics. Just a clean, rectangular table under warm light. No reserved signs, no name tags. Everyone sat where they wanted. When I arrived, the CEO was already there, sleeves rolled up, laughing with a supplier rep. He waved me over. "Michael, grab a seat anywhere," he said. I hesitated, an old habit, but then I pulled out the nearest chair and sat. Halfway through dinner, the CEO leaned closer and said, "That culture note HR sent? That was Julia's idea. But the title, no title seating, but that was mine. Figured it'd send the right message." He smiled faintly, then added, "You were right to keep quiet until it mattered. Some lessons need to be learned in the right room." The conversation drifted to other things. Quarterly targets, vendor contracts, travel plans, normal talk, easy talk. The kind of talk that happens when no one's jockeying for position. As dessert came out, I caught the faint scrape of a chair somewhere behind me, just the soft friction of wood against tile, and for a heartbeat, I froze. The sound hit something deep, old, instinctive. Then it faded. This time, it didn't sting. It just reminded me how far I'd moved. Not seats, not titles, but ground. When the dinner ended, I helped a junior analyst clear her plate, wished her luck with her upcoming project, and stepped outside into the night air. The street was quiet, lights reflecting off wet asphalt, the hum of traffic distant and low. I stood there a moment, breathing, feeling the chill settle on my hands. Then I smiled, a small private one, and walked away without looking back, because some seats aren't worth fighting for, and some victories don't need applause.